So it's time for another gardening week, and I'm back in the polytunnel again, just exactly where I started last week's video. Not today to say how pleased I am with the tomatoes, but I am. But how annoyed I am with these tomatoes. These are sunstripe. They're described as a trailing hanging basket variety. Look at them. Look at how high they are. I mean, I'm just going to get rid of them. They're so annoying. They're way too big and leggy and just horrible. And I've got some down the other end that are even worse. So yeah, that's not too good. So this is my old onion bed. It's got lettuce at that end. It's got turnips here, radicchio here, spinach here that's gone to seed that needs to be pulled out, and turnips again at that end. I've got new spinach to be planted in here, so we'll just do a bit of turning chaos into order, and we'll take all the spinach out. So that's looking a lot better, and what I've decided to do is I'm going to put 4 rows of 10 of spinach in here, and then at the back there I'm going to put some cherry bell radish. And actually the spinach, I was looking at it and it's quite nice. It's called Responder, and it's only 14 days old and it's ready for planting. So that just shows what nice weather we've had just the last couple of weeks. And the cherry bell's the same, so it's 2 weeks old as well. It's one of the nice things about these containerised modules. It is really easy to get the plugs out. I'm just going to dib some holes in here, and yeah, somebody asked me where I got my dibber from, and it's basically just an old broken fork handle which I just chopped off the broken end, and I've been using it for 7 years and it served me very well. It doesn't have any signs of running out, and it's just the right size for a containerised module, provided that when you dib your hole you just work it round a little bit just to give it that little bit more size at the top. There are a few caterpillars in this bed as well that I'm just seeing, so I'm just going to take those out with my fingertips. But you'll notice this is under a cold frame. Spinach at this time of year doesn't really need a cold frame. It will grow slightly quicker. I've mainly got this cold frame top on here right now early, just because of the tree that's above here. You can just sort of see the shade of the tree maybe at that end there, and yeah, it's already starting to drop a lot of branches and leaves on this bed, and I'd prefer not to have too many leaves. You can already see, you know, quite a lot of leaves just blowing in from the side, but honestly any good storm basically at this time of year and it just drops a huge amount of leaves, and there's a lot of cleanup required to sort of keep it leaf free. And I like to keep it as leaf free as possible because that reduces the number of slugs and snails and things that kind of hide in underneath the leaves, and it just makes it easier to harvest as well. So that's the rationale, but I mean obviously by October time it will really benefit anyway from a bit of cover, so that's not very far away. So that always turns out to be deceptively kind of hard work, dibbing all those holes. But maybe it's just because I've been out cycling for an hour and a half. I'm a bit out of breath. Anyway, I'm just dropping these in. I've got 20 of these, and I think I planted 3 per module, and most of them have come up. So that's the radish in, and as so often happens with me, because I don't measure anything, I got the spacing slightly out and ended up with 9 modules per row. So I'll have a few too many, too few actually, spinach. So I'll have to fill all the gaps in with radish. And the design of this bed is not ideal because it doesn't have the sort of central support like this that I'm leaning on now. I normally have one of these sort of halfway down. Makes it easier to get access to the whole of the bed, just by kneeling down. So I have to do quite a bit of stretching to get all this planting done. I mean, that's no bad thing. It's good to stretch, and basically when I'm doing a lot of these things, I feel like I'm doing the plank or something, but as I say, that's not a bad thing. These are lovely seedlings, actually, for such young plants. I'm very happy with them. So I ended up with just one gap after I planted the radish, and I need to give it all a really good water in, because I've got a whole week really of hot weather arriving. Not ideal weather to be planting spinach, but obviously it's better off out of the modules and in the ground than it is staying in the modules. I'm never quite sure. I don't know whether there really is a formula that defines how spinach decides to go to seed. I mean, it must be something to do with day length, but it's not totally to do with day length. It's a kind of combination of day length and heat. So, and maybe even light intensity levels. As I say, I've never 100% figured it out, and it's quite varied by variety as well. And this is a responder as a variety for autumn, which means I'll probably take this bed out and replant it come winter time. I always like doing that. It's always nice to refresh a bed, and it's a nice little activity on a sunny winter's day. Not that we get that many of those, but enough. So I've taken those tomatoes out of the polytunnel, and I'm chopping them up and turning them back into the compost that they grew in. So I think the net is a net positive in terms of nutrients added to the compost bin. So it's not all bad. So I'm now at the point where the last thing I need are more tomatoes. So I'm going to take these plants out, which are the early plants. I'll leave the roots in, take off the sort of first few centimetres of compost, which is absolutely crammed full of tomato seeds, and so just reduces the amount of weeding that I'm going to have to do. And then top them up with fresh compost, and then plant them with green garlic in October. And then when I finish with the green garlic in sort of April, May time, I'll recondition these pots again, and I'll plant tomatoes back in them. And so the roots are all in there rotting down. I found this works really nicely at home. And just get year after year after year of harvests out of the same pot without having to turn the pot back into the compost and go through that cycle. So a bit less work. So I came to open up this melon bed fully and rest it on this bed here, and I found it wouldn't open because these hinges have basically seized up. I am trying to replace them gradually with brass hinges, but I have to get them second hand off eBay because they're so expensive. And so I'm just going to put some outdoor hinges on and just see how I get on. Right, so I've got to tip this over somehow without damaging it. Like that. Hopefully that will work. So actually that works quite nicely. Goes all the way back, squashes the parsnips, but I don't care about that. They're all fully grown. And yeah, it gives me good access for planting. I've just got 3 little cantaloupes in there to harvest. They're not quite, almost ready. So I'll be able to get that bed planted probably next week. And then probably my final job for the week is to kind of see if I can salvage this Utah celery that was planted back on the 5th of April, and it's just sat in these pots, and I've just concluded that rather than sow new plants, I'll just try and keep these going. So I'm going to take off all these dead leaves, and I think it's going to be okay. You know, it's been well watered. It's just stalled now in these pots because of lack of nutrients. But as soon as it gets planted out properly, I think these are going to be nice little plants. So if you look at that now, that is a nice little plant, and you'd be happy to plant that at kind of any time of year, I think. So I don't need all these, but I'll choose the nicest looking of them. And I've already done 1 pot of these. I only need 2 pots for winter celery. And you know, it's amazing how that pot sort of sprung to life once they were, as I say, got some nice nutrients to go at. Okay, so I've got my 3 little plants. I've forked in that bloodfish and bone, and as I say, I think 3 is more than enough, really. They're obviously going to be really pot bound. So that's all a bit messy, but I think they'll be happy there. Lots of water, as I say, because it's nice and sunny for the next week or so. And I really want a lot of compost in here, because this compost, homemade compost, it does tend to shrink a bit over time. So let's go and have a look at these others. Here they are, same plants, 3. And they're ready, almost ready for harvest now. So as long as I keep on top of the harvest of these, I think they'll stay pretty healthy through winter. At least that's my hope. If this works, it does make it easy, because I always find it's a bit tricky getting celery started. It's so slow growing and needs to be germinated on the surface and all of that. And not the easiest thing to grow in summer for a late sowing. So if you can just hold your earlier sowing in sort of suspended animation, that's a lot easier. So I got a lot of seeds sown today. I've just left them in the polytunnel underneath this, so it's quite shaded down here. It's pretty much the coolest place that I've got, and I've obviously put a few slug pellets on top as well, because although this polytunnel is fairly slug and snail free, it's not 100% slug and snail free. So yeah, it's best just to be cautious at this time of year. And I'll put the details of everything that I've sown up on the side of the screen so you can see it. And I have actually started adding the seed supplier information to my sowing log as well, or more specifically my recommended seed supplier. So that's a little bit more useful. So I've just popped down to the plot this morning when it's cool. I'll soon be retreating home because it's just too hot for me, unfortunately, in this weather. But I'm just going to take this netted cover off here and get it moved somewhere else, because the plants are pretty much outgrown it. And while we're here, I was pleased to see that my very late potatoes have just started to come into flower. So that's always something nice to see. And one of the challenges I have with having all of these fixed covers is finding somewhere to put them. You know, it's fine in winter because I need them all, but at this time of year I don't really need so many covers. So in this case I'm just going to have to pop this cover over that parsnip bed over there. Obviously it doesn't need it, but it's just somewhere to store it. And I'm going to have to put some support stakes in for these because I think we might be having some quite windy weather once this sunny spell has cleared. This little transplant that I put in here, unfortunately it's got cabbage aphid. Couldn't see it through the green nets, but also there's a bit of cabbage aphid on the here. Most of the bed seems clear though. Cabbage aphid is the aphid that I worry about the most because once it really takes hold it's quite difficult to get rid of. In this case I'm just going to pull that leaf off, and in this case I think I might just take the whole plant out. You know, it tends to affect the weaker plants, but yeah, I just don't think a little tiny plant like that is recoverable. And I've still got one spare in here which I can transplant down there, but obviously I can't do it while it's so sunny, so I'll leave that for a few days. And that's my last spare, and you know, to be honest, it won't matter if I lose that one as well. I've got plenty of purple sprouting broccoli. Anyway, let's get this fastened on. So I've just put on these cable ties, and I've used reusable ones this time. I managed to convince myself to invest in those. And because of the spread of clubroot on my plot, I've just taken the precaution of sterilising these with Jay's fluid. And this is my fence post driver, but it makes for a really nice tall thin pot, so you get a good deep sort of sterilisation on there. I'd hate to think that every time I move these around I'm moving clubroot from one pot to another. So it's been a very hot week. Kind of, the table looks okay superficially. It's kind of the dregs of summer really, before we start the abundance of autumn, but anyway, we'll see what we've got. So start in this corner, loads and loads of these little centre cut squashes. I'm taking them off because basically this is what's happening to them. You know, they're just dying off because there's just so many larger ones on there. You just can't support all these new little ones. So yeah, it's just worth just picking them at that size. They're quite nice actually, even though they're tiny. You know, you've still got all this part here which is eatable. This is the seeds there, and a few courgettes underneath. Most of the fruit we just pick on the day as we need it, but I just picked a few pears and just a few apples just to show you those. Beans, way more than we need, to be honest, even though we've only got a tiny little bed of beans. Yeah, we're starting to get some decent size peppers, although we are having a bit of a problem with some of them rotting. It's not blossom end rot, they're kind of rotting in the top here through dripping rain or just condensation dripping into the tops here. So don't really know what I can do about that, so I'm not doing anything. Potatoes just from the store, you know, we've still got loads in the store. We haven't yet harvested any of our March sown, April planted potatoes yet. These are the last few carrots that were carrot root fly damaged. So you can see there's, you know, some quite serious damage on these. So I'm pleased to be finished with these really. We probably just put these in the compost, but just thought I'd show you those. And a few more peppers and beetroot. And actually these are the first turnips that we've harvested since spring. So that's always something quite nice. We've got a bit of celery, and these are the last of the summer salad onions. So we start with some much nicer salad onions next week. These are the tomatoes for the salad mixes. Midweek we harvested another big batch of tomatoes, and Debbie chopped all those up and did her sort of patented passata mix and made a lot of jars of that. We always sort of prepare them and put sort of herbs and garlic and onions and peppers and things in the mix, and then we roast them, and then we just put them through a moulin, and yeah, lots of passata. So we are overflowing with passata this year. Leeks, yeah, what can you say about leeks? And then this is what happens to those little centre cuts when they're left to grow a little bit more. And this is kind of the size I prefer to harvest them. You can leave them and they'll grow on into a winter squash, and we've got some of those as well. And yeah, the dregs of the onions. So I think these are the last of the red winter, overwintered onions. And these are just a few of the used now, red barren onions. And you can see they're just like little bits of damage on them, on the skins, just not looking that good, or they're really small. Garlic. This is another one of the red, this is another one of the overwintered onions, the tough balls, and you can see just quite a significant difference between those and the red winter. The red winter I don't think are worth growing anymore, but the tough ball are still pretty good. Some little Jack Belittle squash, and actually when I was doing the harvest, this one fell off the climbing frame that it was growing on, and it fell off because just this little bit of mould or rot set in on here. So I kind of rummaged around and managed to find it, and I'm pleased that I did, actually, because I think there'll be a substantial amount of that squash that's usable even with that little bit of rot on there. And we're not really picking any of our winter squash right now because we've got so much of the squash. And then we've got the melons. These are the little cantaloupes and honeydew, and these have been really amazing so far this year. I think I've got 1 honeydew and 3 cantaloupes left, and then I'm done with the melons. So it's a fantastic timing for replanting with all the winter veggies. So I'm very happy with that. Just a few parsnips and a few carrots. And if you look at these carrots, you will see quite bad slug damage on them. Now, I have never had such bad slug damage on carrots at this time of year. So these are summer carrots, and they're not very tough, you know, so it may be that that's why we've got more slug damage on them. I don't normally have summer carrots at this time of year. I think these are the bigger summer carrots, and these have got a lot less damage, but you can still see some little holes on them. So yeah, so it's slightly worrying. I've done a test harvest on some of my winter carrots, and they're all looking great at the moment, as are my late autumn carrots. So I'm hoping that everything's all right. So just a little bit of kale. I've picked quite a few sprout tops. Now, Alison asked me, when do you pick the sprout tops? Well, I'm picking these now because I want to take out a few of my Brussels sprout plants in the kitchen garden because we're having a greenhouse put in and they're in the way. So I've taken the sprout tops off to stimulate growth on the stems of the sprouts, and also obviously to eat the sprout tops. So that's why I've harvested those. I don't normally take them off until sort of November, December time. And then I've got some calabrese side shoots, some red cabbage, a whole host of different types of Asian greens there, really lovely. I thought last week the cucumbers were pretty much finishing, but this flush of heat I was giving them a new lease of life, and so I've got loads of cucumbers again, and the, what's this called? Golden purslane, that is coming to an end now. So you can see there's loads of seeds on it, and I've never had it in sort of, almost to the middle of September now. I've always taken it out before now, so it's dropping a lot of seeds, which means I won't have to sow it next year because it's really quite prolific and good at growing from its own seeds. So so maybe there'll be one more pick next week, and then I'll get that bed replanted, and then just the salad mixes. And I've got a really nice mix. I think I've got about 7 or 8 different types of lettuce leaves in there, and a few Asian greens. And as I said, I'm going to add this purslane and some tomatoes and some cucumbers and some salad carrots and some salad onions to make a nice salad mix up. And then I'm done. So my name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.